Hi, I'm Che, and this is the last step 4 of applying to grad school for clinical programs. I'm not going to go into the details of the application process because each school has different requirements. I'm going to say, for example, when I applied, you had to apply in paper. Everything had to be in, I think it was duplicate or triplicate, and submitted in hard copy to their office. So if you lived out of city, you will have massive courier fees to send in like this. They also require 2 writing samples. So these are things that you need to know way in advance. I suggest starting your application about a year in advance. Absolute bare minimum is 6 months. Bare minimum is 6 months. Because you will need reference letters. Some schools want the person who's referring you to mail it directly to them. Some schools want you to submit it in hard copy and the rest of your file in digital. There's some schools where they want you to get a hard copy letter and have it stamped with a signature and ink, and then you scan it and upload it. And each school is different, so you need to know these steps way in advance. The mailing process and going back and forth will take time. Like I said, there's lots of steps to do before you actually work on your letter and filling out the forms. So start early. If the deadlines to apply are in December, you start in the summer. Start in the summer by the absolute latest. Is the summer. Suggestion is a year to get everything. In clinical programs, I know the question was asked at the panel. In clinical programs, about grades and your CV. In clinical programs, I found that their evaluation is relatively balanced. So there's going to be, each school will kind of set a cutoff of a GPA cutoff. Because clinical psych requires research, it requires clinical practice, it requires coursework, the GPA will reflect your ability to complete the coursework. It'll give them a little bit of an idea about your ability to conduct research, but that information about whether you're going to be a good therapist, or you're going to be able to handle this kind of work, will come from your CV and will come from your lettre de motivation, intention letter. Sorry. Quand j'ai fait, je l'ai fait en français pour des écoles et j'ai étudié en français, donc des fois je connais seulement des mots en français. Sometimes I only know words in French because I study in French. I feel like your CV is probably the most important document that you submit. When you're submitting a CV, it's not your regular CV that you would use to apply for a job. This is an academic CV. So academic CVs are longer, they're much more detailed. They have a lot of different activities and stuff in it. So your volunteerism, teaching experience, all that kind of stuff will factor in quite highly. I remember when I applied, I think my academic CV was about 4 pages long, and it was mostly community work. I do a lot of community work, panels and trainings and workshops and stuff like that. So my CV was a lot of community work and a lot of clinical. I've been working in social services, like paid job in social services, since I was 16. So I have a pretty long clinical history, and that is what I put the most emphasis on in my CV and in my letter. The other thing that is important is to have research experience. So if you did an undergrad thesis, make sure definitely emphasize that, make it clear that you did it, because not all people have to. And then if you had any other research experience, you were a research assistant, you participated at a conference, presented at a conference, you were like a research labs research coordinator, anything like that that touches on research or teaching experience will be very, very important in a clinical psych CV. And as for grades, yeah, each school will have a cutoff, but your other experience will be important too. So my suggestion is to put your grades into context if they're not fantastic. So I'm not gonna go say what my GPA is, but I always worked when I was in high school. Like I said, I started social service when I was 16. During my undergrad, I was always working. So I put my grades into context. I said that, while I was learning the theoretical in school, I felt it really important to get practical experience. Unfortunately, that affected my grades. Something like that is simple, and it just it puts the focus back on all the good things that you're doing, and it also contextualizes any struggles. Someone asked how much detail, or they say to tell a story with your personal letter. I personally wouldn't put more details or more information that you wouldn't give to someone that you're meeting for the second time. So I wouldn't go too personal. Wouldn't necessarily go into traumatic history and stuff like that, or unless that really informs your clinical work and why you wanted to get into this. I would keep it pretty simple, you met someone for the second time, and so you know them a little bit, feel more comfortable. It's not just small talk. You can really talk about your life, but not huge personal details. They tend to want to see that you can compartmentalize a little bit between personal and professional. Okay, so applications start early. Your CV, your letter. If you are working in a clinical job right now, you are doing therapy or crisis intervention or testing, anything like that, document your hours. This was one thing I wish I would have known. Document your hours. I didn't know that all the time that I was working in crisis intervention and social services could have, it wasn't just paid, it could have counted towards my degree or getting into school. All the different tests so I was working in crisis intervention. Luckily, the social workers there, they knew that I wanted to go into clinical psych, so they trained me on the evaluation process and the intake and stuff like that. So I was able to put that in my CV and in my personal letter. And I think UDAM had a specific form where you had to enter in all the tests that you've used, all the evaluation tools, stuff like that. So I really wish I would have kept a better document of that before I had applied, instead of looking at it and and then trying to scramble to find all that information after the fact. That also plays into the letters that you're going to need, your reference letters for clinical programs. I would suggest to touch on those three things again. So your clinical work, your research experience, and your grades slash, you can have a personal reference too. Someone, if you do a lot of community work, for example, having a reference for that is totally 110% okay for clinical psych. But so for me, my references were, I'm trying to remember, it was my undergrad thesis director, my boss, my clinical supervisor at the crisis stabilization unit, and another professor that I had in my undergrad. But for the honors or master's part of my undergrad, I had a prof that I took a couple courses with, I got along with. He knew me well. He knew I was moving to Montreal and stuff like that. So when I emailed him about a reference letter, it didn't blindside him. It didn't come out of nowhere. It's not like, oh, hey, I haven't talked to you in 3 years. Can you do this thing for me? Even though, like, that's totally fine. Professors know that that's part of their job, is to write reference letters. I decided to keep in contact with the professors that I liked and I got along with. And that ended up helping me out in the long run for grad school applications. So I think that's it. I can't believe I was able to fit everything into 5 videos. But that is like a 1-hour crash course on applying to clinical programs